Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition. We're going to start off your Labor Day weekend with some of the conversation we're going to have around the table. Penna Dexter with us, as well as Jeremy Dice, who, of course, is the Special Counsel for Litigation and Communications at First Liberty. And as you might expect, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about religious liberty issues, but also what's going on in Afghanistan. The issue of abortion has become really a very significant one this week. We've had comments from all sorts of individuals, and so we will be covering lots of topics. And if you'd like to join us, we would always love to have your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Penna, lots to talk about today.
Lots to talk about. And, you know, the Texas heartbeat bill that went into effect this week is a national story. I mean, even the president is weighing in on it. But I'm so glad Jeremy is here, because it is different. It's different than the other heartbeat bills. And so I think he can maybe help us understand that.
Well, thank you for volunteering me to articulate everything. Well, I hope we can do a good enough job of it all. But look, it's a good week. Look, there are more kids being saved today because of the action or non-action that was taken earlier this week. There's a lot of things to take place yet. This is not a done case by any stretch. This is just the preliminary section of that. But, you know, the future is on the life side. I'm confident. And I think seeing some of the responses that have come out of that, both in popular culture as well as even Justice Sotomayor's dissent in this whole thing, is really kind of shocking and revealing as to where the other side is on this issue.
And again, we have a number of articles. Roe is the problem. One, the Texas abortion law is a sideshow, from our friend David French.
Yeah, is it really a sideshow? I think that would be a good question.
And so we will get into that. Also, what it might look like for the 2022 election and a number of other topics. But first, let's, if we can, talk about religious liberty. And first of all, one of the things we encourage, Jeremy, for people to do is watch First Liberty Live. And yesterday you had an individual that is another one of these experts on the area of religious liberty.
Yeah, Tom Farr, who heads the Religious Freedom Institute, joined us to talk about the importance of religious liberty when it comes to national security, which you wouldn't think maybe that those two things mix very well. Penna, maybe you can share, because you watched it yesterday as well. But they really do connect together. If you don't have that robust sense of a commitment to freedom through religious freedom, then you're going to make a whole lot of different judgments when it comes to other security interests as well. And we're seeing that writ large in the country right now, but how consequential it is to promote freedom and religious freedom.
Well, I think we're seeing it played out on the international stage, especially. We will see what happens in Afghanistan, not a country noted for religious freedom. And when the Taliban took over before 20-something years ago, religious freedom dropped precipitously. Things have been better in Afghanistan. You wouldn't put them at the top of the list. But now we'll have to be watching what happens, because really, Tom Farr did say countries that have religious freedom tend to be more stable. They also do better economically. And so we had a president and a Secretary of State who actually went beyond most administrations in Trump and Pompeo to promote religious liberty across internationally. And actually, Tom Farr was not thinking that would necessarily go away. We'll see. I guess he's sort of hopeful that that might be maintained. So we'll see.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, as you and he said, when you have religious liberty, you have a greater sense of stability. And the reason for that is should be rather obvious for us, right? If we don't have something that we've got to suppress as a part of who we are, then we're more likely to be at peace and calm with one another. And if we're not having usually countries that don't have a commitment to religious freedom are actively persecuting parts of their population that don't agree with the majoritarian view of religion. So, of course, there's going to be violence amongst the community there. And the concern that we have in the United States is that if religion is treated poorly, and it doesn't matter which religion it actually is, but any of the religions are treated poorly or with any kind of disdain, then you're pushed further off into the margins. And while we may not have hands or heads chopped off because of it all, the sequestering of religion is equally bad because it lacks, it prevents the influence, the sustaining influence that morality provides to our system of government. Let's remember the words of John Adams, right? Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. And so we really kind of have to have religion in our country in order to make our Constitution make sense.
Might even mention his book, A World of Faith and Freedom. And in some respects, we say it's like a tripod. There's political freedom, there's economic freedom, but a lot of our libertarian friends forget that there's religious freedom. And if you limit the scope of what the government can say about religion, you probably, as you said just a minute ago, Penna, probably limit the scope of the government in the economy, and that allows for entrepreneurship and allows for the greatest amount of political freedom and economic freedom by giving religious freedom.
Yeah, and when you think about what religions themselves do in the culture, that if they didn't do it or weren't allowed to do it or provide, then the government would have to do it or somebody else would have to provide, the hospital, the orphan care, adoption care, so many things. Caring for the homeless. And you think of the organizations that are out there doing these good things. When they're squeezed out, and we've already watched some of these battles taking place, then somebody has to step up and do all of that.
So again, really good material. Let me just mention real quickly before we go to a break that one of the things we're offering today, which is already on your website, you can go to firstliberty.org or find the link to the Religious Liberty Protection Act. You were getting a lot of phone calls there lately at First Liberty. Talk about that.
Man, we've had thousands. I'm not making that number up. We've had thousands of requests for legal help when it comes to vaccination mandates. And I'm very sympathetic to this issue, regardless of how you feel about the vaccine, and I encourage you to have your strong position on that issue. I hope we would all agree that this is not something that ought to be imposed upon people in a way that would violate their conscience. Make the argument. I'm all in favor of making the argument and encouraging and persuading people. But the heavy-handed tactics that the government has used here and corporations are using right now will actually have the opposite intended effect. So rhetorically, it's a bad move. But in terms of suppressing or punishing people for having an individual liberty and individual responsibility, I think is the wrong move. And so we've had a lot of calls on these issues and trying to figure out how do you go about that if you can't even have an exemption to the whole thing. Those are thorny and weighty issues. And so it's not really good for even a minute soundbite on the radio of things or longer discussion on TV. You really have to go to read through a whole bunch of stuff to kind of get a sense of what's going on and all the little nuances that are involved there. So we put together a rather sizable toolkit that's very approachable and help guide you through the thinking and the process. And if at the end of it you're persuaded that you still need to apply for a religious accommodation or exemption request, it'll guide you through how to go about doing that with your employer. That's something that you're going to have to consider for yourself, make a matter of prayer in your own conscience to figure out where you stand on that issue and how to go about doing it.
Again, it is the first link, and when we come back from the break, we'll get into some other issues, but it's the Religious Liberty Protection Kit. If you find yourself saying, I want to know more about that, don't call First Liberty. They've got enough phone calls. There is all the resources I think you would need right there on the website, pointofview.net, or of course you can go to First Liberty to find it there as well. But we put it number one so you can find it easily, download it, and use it effectively. Come back from the break. We are not forgetting Afghanistan, although there are a lot of people now encouraging you to move on to other topics. And we do have a couple of pieces here, one having to do with what about these individuals we are bringing to this country from Afghanistan? What about the military? Haven't seen anybody resigning, stepping down. What about some of the issues and lessons we could have learned and need to learn in the future? So we'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
20 years ago, a Democratic senator writing in the Washington Post criticized President George W. Bush for saying that the U.S. would do whatever it took to defend Taiwan. That senator is now our president. Joe Biden might have changed his mind since 2001. He certainly has changed his mind on other topics. China is different in 2021 than it was in 2001. Back then, the focus was on trying to bring China into the community of nations. Today, the focus is on China's threat to the international order. Earlier this year, Admiral Philip Davidson warned Congress that China could assault Taiwan in the next 6 years. Other commentators believe that such an aggressive action might happen shortly after the Winter Olympics in China, which are held next February. If China decided to move against Taiwan, would President Biden and his cabinet believe a military response was necessary? Is Taiwan important enough to defend? Taiwan is often called the heart of Asia because of its central location, but there is much more to this small island than just its strategic location. It is roughly the size of Maryland and the home for 24 million people. They are wealthier than most of their neighbors. If you look at per capita GDP, the U.S. is the 7th wealthiest country. Taiwan is the 12th wealthiest country. America is supposed to honor the Taiwan Relations Act. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan should trigger response. But how likely is President Biden to respond given his long relationship with China and his recent disaster withdrawing troops and civilians from Afghanistan? U.S. support of Taiwan may for now provide enough deterrence to keep China from attacking the island, but the future is still uncertain. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice, and if you would like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. First article we have posted here, other than, of course, the one we just mentioned, the Religious Liberty Protection Kit, is one by our good friend Victor Davis Hanson. There's a problem in the upper reaches of our military, you think? And, Penna, if nothing else, this one reminds us that the generals now that are saying you have to support the president and you can't say anything critical about the commander and all the other kinds of things that are oftentimes said, only now are they saying this because they certainly were very critical of the previous president, and some of them even now are making some statements that are just pretty hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, first of all, this military is controlled by a bunch of diversity hawks, but they're incompetent diversity hawks, or else they're crazy because of the way, and we just saw this played out in the abandonment of the Bagram airfield in Afghanistan, the backwards way that we extricated ourselves from the country and from the quote-unquote long war, and just the decisions that have been made that are just, you scratch your head and wonder how anybody that's gotten to those ranks in the military could make them. So there is something terribly, terribly wrong. And, I don't know. I think that leftism and, far left extremist ideas, it actually does make people crazy. Even people who have become, a 4-star general in the military. And that's what we're dealing with right now. And I don't know what we do. I don't know really what we do about it, except just talk about the absurdity of it.
You know, we've talked about how the left has taken over, of course, the universities long ago, and then started to take over a lot of the Fortune 500 companies. But there was always this assumption that you had a level of sanity, common sense within the military. And I think most of the rank and file still probably are that way. But again, the argument Victor Davis Hanson has, Jeremy, is that in the upper reaches, maybe not so much common sense.
In order to get promoted today, whether or not that is through the corporate structure or in the military, you must show a level of wokeness and lack of a position on something other than just taking the full position of the leftist ideology. If you come out anywhere in centralized or to the right, you will not promote. And that includes within the military. If you take too many stands on things and actually do something in your life, right, take a hard stand that people don't agree with, the chances of you moving forward through that old adage of hard work, I think is becoming less and less of a reality in our country today. You are more often to be rewarded for taking a popular leftist idea than for actually engaging in hard work and producing the widget that's in front of you. The same thing is true within our military, and I think our Joint Chiefs, the heads of our service departments, they show this. Remember the recent apology that one of our generals made in front of Congress for being a white man, right? He wants to know what has contributed to his privilege and all these things. This is a guy that is tasked with making sure our force is ready to kill people, right? And he's concerned about his white privilege, so-called. The job of the military is to be less concerned about how everybody feels and does. I know that's a very popular thing right now, and we can get Carl Truman on the phone to talk through about how that means, what that means in our society. But the reality is our fighting force is designed to do one thing and do one thing very, very well. To execute the enemy, right? That's the job of the military. And I know that sounds very harsh and strong, but that's their job, is to go out and prevent our freedoms from being removed from us by force, right? We go out and prevent that. And so the mistakes that have been made through this whole process, I think you're right, Penna, to say they seem to be very obvious to the casual observer. Why would we give up one very strategic airbase and lock ourselves inside of a city and to an airport that's hard to get out of when we have all of our? Why would you leave $59 billion worth of equipment that we paid for sitting there for the other, the enemy to use? I mean, just for the cheapskate in me, I don't like that idea. It just seems like a really bad idea, though. Why not draw down responsibly to get that stuff back home before you pull out? There's a lot of very easy things, but I think this is just one more note along the way of realizing that the people that have promoted up all the way through the ranks here are the people that have made the compromises along the way, that have done the politically expedient thing to make sure that they've said the right thing, shook the right hand, been at the right cocktail parties to get to that place. They may not have always been the ones that have actually been in the battle, literally in this case, doing the thing. Those people have probably capped out somewhere in the neighborhood of lieutenant colonel. And they just have not. They have failed to advance beyond that because they've actually done something, and they've had to take a hard stand that hurts their chances of being able to promote further.
Think of the people that First Liberty has had to defend just for expressing their faith in some way in the military. Not just the chaplains, but sometimes rank and file. And when we look at the composition of the people that join the military, they're often religious. They're often Christians or other religions. Because they've got something inside them that that helps them to want to serve the country, that they would sacrifice for their fellow citizens and for a higher calling. So those are the type of people that join. And then, often they're from Southern, more conservative families. I mean, that's disproportionately done. So you sort of wonder, with this big decision that was made with Afghanistan, a 20-year effort, the way it's been done. Why would someone want to join, and why would parents let their children join the military at this point? It's just starting to make me wonder if we will have to reinstate a draft someday. And, of course, they talked in Congress just yesterday about drafting our daughters.
Yes, there you go. And again, that's part of the issue, is that if indeed you get to a point where we just can't hit our recruiting quotas, and I think that's a prediction that's reasonable to make in light of everything that's just taken place, then you will have a draft.
Yeah, well, and go back to our previous discussion about vaccine mandates. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% of the United States military that is not vaccinated right now, and many of those who do not want to. If that's even 10% of those choose to just simply absent themselves from the fighting force, we render lots of units unable to fight. I mean, they would not be. I can't remember capable of. I can't remember the exact technical term of it all, but they wouldn't be battle ready. They couldn't go into operational battle mode if they had to. This weakens us dramatically by just simply not offering an accommodation to people who could continue to wear a mask or whatever it is we need to do to get through this time of the pandemic. So it continues to boggle my mind why we would continue to push these things and not encourage more freedom on that issue.
You know, what's kind of amazing to me right now is with the Delta variant, people are getting COVID even when they're vaccinated. And so, you know, in the military, you're forced together. I mean, it's really hard to distance, especially in a lot of situations. And so, I think that this situation that we have right now with the fact that vaccinated people all over the place are getting it. So it takes, some of the logic out of mandating the vaccine, especially in a place like the military where everybody's young. Most people are going to have a 3 to 5 day cold kind of thing. And, you know, it just seems like it's about the worst thing you could do policy-wise. Because as you said earlier, Jeremy, when people see that the government is mandating something, they're going to a lot of people are going to run away from it. Why do you have to tell me I have to do this? Isn't it a good thing to do?
Yeah, and especially they watch TV and they see the Taliban soldiers. They're not wearing masks. You know, I mean, they're not socially distancing.
Well, some of them are for a different reason. Yes, you know, and of course, in this article, it talks about Michael Hayden suggested that any unvaccinated Trump supporters actually should be put on planes back to Afghanistan. So that doesn't help the conversation here as well. And that's been what's so troubling is that you've had so many things critically said about the previous president, now a few even of this president about the withdrawal. We want to build some kind of esprit de corps, some kind of desire to come and serve your nation, and that has been undercutted over the last couple of years because of some of the things that have been said and done by the military.
Absolutely, and Penna's right about our clients, right? If you can't join the military right now for honor of country and want to do that, you certainly can't do it for love of God either. It's very difficult to, again, how many of our clients or people that we knew that had an issue that reached out to us for help have said, you know, I really want to take a stand on this issue and I don't like this, but I can't say anything because if I say something, I won't be able to provide for my family in this career anymore. And they're 5 years away. They're 6 years away from retirement where they could actually be able to do. I mean, how this happens and those are the ones that call and tell us about it. What about those that never even call us?
Right.
That just simply decide to absent themselves, to violate their own conscience and move forward rather than make us think about it and be ostracized from not only the unit but the military in general. We can't afford to have that level of dismissal from our military and expect ourselves to have a force that is up and ready to go.
We're going to take a break, but if you'd like to join us on that issue, perhaps some of you have served in the military, have some thoughts about that. We'll come back and maybe take a call or two from you, but also one of the other articles from Michael Anton, who's been on the program with us before, Importing Enemies. We recognize that a good number of the individuals coming over from Afghanistan have served with the military and are probably wanting to come here and enjoy the benefits of American culture, but he reminds us that there are thousands and thousands that are unvetted, and as one of our callers said earlier in the week, what do we know about them? Not very much. That should concern us. We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice here. And one of the other articles that we have here, Importing Enemies, comes from Michael Anton, who has been on the program with us before and was trying to just remind us of something to think about. We have a number of you that have called in earlier this week, so it's worth covering one more time, and that is when we are bringing thousands and thousands of individuals here from Afghanistan, and they are not properly vetted, we have to begin to say, certainly in and amongst some of them are going to be individuals that will cause us a problem. Now, the typical reaction to that is, well, you're just a bunch of racists. No, this is just a reality of the fact that whether people cross the border or whether they come here on an airplane, and we don't know who they are, there is always the possibility that in amongst some of those individuals, they intend us harm. And Penna, one of the things that Michael talks about here is we are talking about thousands and thousands, and you can't, with a straight face, say all of these individuals were translators for the U.S. military.
You know, I have such a soft place in my heart for people that helped us and took some risks in doing so. But when you start to see these numbers, it becomes a little unbelievable that, you know, people are designated a translator and there's this many of them. Do we really have 200,000 translators, and now we need to bring them all here after the war is over? But, you know, we don't like to leave people behind, obviously, and that's
right.
The national psyche right now is just taking a blow because of what we've done. But you know, these numbers are crazy, and as you said, it's a risk. And I don't know, I just think that it's not, I think there's another agenda behind it, let's put it that way, because there is an agenda of the left to try to get Americans who aren't conservatives, don't understand our founding, don't understand all our freedoms and our liberties, into the country as a Democrat constituency. And so, you know, that could be the case down the road when they become citizens.
Well, but hold up my little booklet on Sharia law. One of the things that we found out is that when we tried really hard, and let's give President George W. Bush the attempt to try to really hard grow a democracy on Muslim soil, the reality is that almost every survey showed that a disproportionate number of those individuals who were supposed to be democratized, here he says 99%, that may be a little bit of hyperbole, but just barely. But if you believe in Sharia law, it's really hard to believe in the American democratic experiment. It's hard to believe in a republic because Sharia law is based on the idea that a Muslim should have more rights than a non-Muslim. Hate to say it, a man has more rights than a woman, you know, under Sharia law. And if that's your mindset, there's at least a re-education that's going to have to take place.
Yeah, well, look, we gave the Taliban a list of people that we wanted to have come through the gates. Are you saying that we didn't get a list in return as people that should come through or should not come? I mean, so the Taliban, you're saying, did not do any vetting for us when they let people through there to make sure that all the right people were in there? I think Anton makes an interesting point and rather eye-opening one to say how many of the people that have come through there are convicted pederasts, for instance, right?
That was the other one I hadn't brought up. Yeah,
that'll catch your attention real quick.
Yep.
And it may not be, maybe that's going to the extreme point, but how many of them are formerly incarcerated do they have a system of incarceration, I assume, in that country over there? How many of them have committed crimes like that? Are we unleashing problems within our neighborhood that we don't need to be unleashing and should not be unleashing? We already have hard enough time with those issues as it is right now. Let's I mean, maybe this is another reason why we should have maybe slowed down the resettlement process, the getting out of Afghanistan. Funny, I don't think we've even talked about whether or not we agreed with getting out of Afghanistan. I think the majority of the country is like, sure, we get it. It's important to get out of there at some point, but how do you get out of there? That's where we have the disagreement with. It's not whether, it's the how. I think the president and his team misjudged the how quite dramatically.
I think they do too, and we can go back to that. But I do want to kind of jump off on what Jeremy said, that the climate in the country right now, with everybody is woke, and a lot of the leaders in our large cities, for instance, are. And so you have people that come in that might commit a crime here. And are they going to be given a pass for things simply because they are not white Americans? Are they going to get, maybe some leniency on some things that might happen, that they might do when they're just in the course of their lives? So we're bringing in people that, a lot of them might become hard working business owners when they get here. Who knows? But we don't know. We don't know what kind of problems we're importing.
A couple of weeks ago, I read a note from an individual that says, I know that when I get on this airplane, I'm going to have to go to a refugee camp. Probably will be there a year before I even figure out where we go. And then all of a sudden we find out all these people are landing in this country. So where's the middle part there of the refugee camps? Because that certainly existed in Iraq. Remember when ISIS came down? Matter of fact, we raised funds here at Point of View through the Cradle Fund to actually help ministers in those refugee camps to meet some of the needs of those individuals. And that provides, if you will, a secondary vetting before indeed you bring them to this country. And back to Jeremy's comment, if at that point they manifest certain kinds of criminal behavior in the refugee camp, you know that you don't want to send them on to Madison, Wisconsin, or Boston, Massachusetts, or wherever you might want to send them. Although I have noticed that the states where they're being sent right now all tend to be swing states.
Interesting.
Which I don't know what that's all about. I think I do, but that just makes you even more skeptical.
Yeah, and look, America has long been about bringing the tired and the poor and the helpless, those yearning to be free, to our shores. We desperately want that. In fact, I think one of the individuals, the sons of someone who was probably resettled as a part of the Iraqi resettlement process, is a friend of mine who's marrying a very dear friend of mine in the next couple of weeks, as a matter of fact. So it's something that has real personal consequences to people like me, and certainly to him and my friend who discovered him and is now being married, and life is great. We're all for it. Bring them. We want to see more people come and yearn to be free. That's a great idea. Now, we've got to remember what it means to be free and to yearn to have our freedom again. That seems to be something that is contrary in our circles of governmental conversation these days. But I dare say that many of the people, probably most of the people that are leaving and fleeing Afghanistan, do want to be free and probably have a better sense of what it means to be free than even most people in Madison, Wisconsin, for instance, have a sense of what it means to be free. Their definition of not being free means that they don't get to use their iPhone when the Wi-Fi is down, right? I mean, this is ridiculous in comparison to people who literally know what it means to not be free. But we have to be very prudent about going about this as well, because the operating assumption on the left is that everybody's good and has a good heart, and they just need a little help to be able to get a little bit better. The operating assumption for most people on the right, I think and hope, would be, people are basically evil, and so we're going to verify that they have some good bona fides about them before we allow them to operate freely inside of our country. And
as we have seen the way our government prosecuted the withdrawal. And, even just people that are lay non-military can look at it and think it was done totally backwards and a lot of bad decisions were made. Do we trust them then to have a robust vetting process? Probably not.
And again, that gets back to the issue we've talked about in terms of immigration, because once you come here, sooner or later, you'd like to be a citizen. And if they go through the process of becoming a citizen, I've said, Jeremy, sometimes the individuals that are naturalized citizens know more about our legal structure and about our history than people that are born here. So in some cases, those individuals actually make very good citizens rather than the person who's born here and doesn't have a clue as to the fact that we have three branches of government or something like that.
Yes, and they also tend to recognize totalitarianism in its soft and hard forms because they've seen it in their own country and experience, and they've fled it.
Yes.
So my hope is that these individuals that are coming over will teach a thing or two to the young brains full of mush that we've got coming out of our education system right now that are thinking that you've got to be woke in order to be free. The opposite is actually true on these things. And let me introduce you to some people who have really experienced totalitarianism, not the quote-unquote Nazis that are Senator Cruz and Donald Trump and other people like that they throw that word around like it means nothing at all. No, let me actually introduce you to people who have, seen hands cut off, who have seen women beaten with rods in the middle of a soccer field. All these these different things where the worst case scenarios that you've seen repeatedly on the news in the last couple of weeks, that is a real problem. That is really totalitarianism. That is what we want to stay away from. And that is why we don't even begin going down the road towards this socialistic liberalism that you want us to go down with.
Very good. Bill Maher said some of the same things. Of course, he used a lot of words we couldn't use here on the air, which is why I didn't want to play it, but it was the same kind of argument. He's kind of had it up to here with some of the woke liberals that are saying, oh, they're just like the Taliban. Oh, please.
Bill Maher and I share a lot of common. Yeah.
But anyway, it is interesting to see even he's making those kinds of statements as well. We have quite a bit more to cover, and we also have some phone calls coming in. 1-800-351-1212. Might just mention during this break, those of you listening on a computer will hear Penna Dexter's commentary. We'll probably get to that next hour. We'll take some phone calls, and then the issue of abortions in the news. We need to talk about that. We will do that right after this.
Who could miss the disturbing shift in how our society deals with gender confusion in young people? The consensus once was that it's best to give children time for gender dysphoria to pass, and, if it persists, to help them with their pain. Now, medical professionals routinely agree with and affirm trans-identifying adolescents, allowing them to self-diagnose and providing them with gender-bending drugs and surgeries. There are voices of caution and reason. The American College of Pediatricians boldly opposes this agenda and speaks the truth. So does Abigail Schreier, who writes columns for the Wall Street Journal and the Federalist. Most of her recent work sets forth her rising concern about the transgender craze among teenage girls. She spoke recently at a Hillsdale College event. An adaptation of her remarks appears in Hillsdale's Imprimis, June-July 2021. She describes gender dysphoria as the feeling of severe discomfort in a person's biological sex. This has historically begun in early childhood, between the ages of 2 and 4, and has usually involved a boy who insisted he was not a boy but a girl. Ms. Schreier points out that in many cases, puberty seems to have helped children overcome gender dysphoria. Now, large numbers of teen girls are declaring themselves trans. Ms. Schreier says in prior cases, when no one intervened medically or encouraged what we today call social transition, over 70% of them naturally outgrew their gender dysphoria. But we no longer leave these kids alone. They get affirmation in a new trans identity. They can have new names, new pronouns. They get hormones, even surgery. In her book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, Abigail Schreier describes what she says has become a social contagion among troubled teen girls. Gender activists encourage this by lying to them, telling them only they know their true gender. It's a family-destroying, culture-killing message. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And we will get into the issue of abortion for a number of reasons. Of course, we have the heartbeat bill in Texas. Of course, that relates to the Supreme Court, relates to the very important case that'll be going before the Supreme Court. But before we do that, let's pick up a phone call or two. So we'll go to South Carolina first. And Loretta, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, hello. Well, I listen to you regularly.
Thank you.
Okay. Does our freedom of religion cover acts that we would consider crimes committed under the guise of Sharia law.
Okay, good question.
Some years ago,
Yeah.
a man in Kansas killed his daughter because she dated a Gentile. And his wife was completely, well, yes, of course he did. That's what he should have done. And I never heard.
Sure. And that's called an honor killing. And that's a question that I'm sure you've had before, Jeremy, about the issue of, you support religious liberty, but what about this idea of Sharia law? Yeah.
Well, in that specific case, that violated the law of the United States. You cannot kill another human being in cold-blooded murder. That is illegal. That is called murder, and you cannot use your religion as an excuse for murdering someone. So if anybody uses their religion as a justification for murdering someone or throwing them into a volcano, it is illegal in the United States, and it will always be illegal in the United States as long as we have the government that we have right now. Now, that should never be conflated with the principles of religious liberty, which say that you have the right to be able to pursue the dictates of your conscience absent the interference of the government establishing a substantial burden. Now, interestingly enough, the government can impose upon your religion so long as, and they can even do so substantially, they can put a substantial burden upon your free exercise of religion so long as there is a compelling justification for doing so. Now, there is a strong, compelling justification for the government interfering with anybody who would be religious and use their religion to kill someone else. And so that will always be upheld by the government. That will always be the case. That is not the same as someone being left to peaceably worship within their own home, within their house of worship, be that a church, a cathedral, a mosque, or a synagogue. Those are completely different things. Now, if those mosques or synagogues were, and let me take it away from those things, because this does not happen in those situations, but if there is some sort of weird religion that is out there that requires human sacrifice in order for that religion to be worshipped, the state has a compelling justification to substantially burden that practice of religion and stop you from doing that very thing. And they should do that very thing. So the concerns over Sharia law, theologically, I share, and I think they are wrong, and that's why I do not participate in that faith tradition at all, and I view that as also a spiritual lie that we should avoid at all costs and combat wherever we might see it intellectually and convert people from that to what we believe to be the truth of the gospel. But in terms of having the right to be able to engage in the free exercise of religion, I will defend people of faith, of every faith, till my dying day, because that will be of great benefit to my life as a Christian itself as well. Because every religion that is free raises my freedom, my boat of freedom as well, to be able to do what I wish to do as well. So that's probably not going to be a satisfactory answer to some that have this concern about Sharia law. I'm not concerned about that right now because of all the things that I've just said and a whole lot more. You can go into that more too, Kerby, if you want. I'm much more concerned at the hordes that are at the current gate than the ones that will be at our gate in 100 years from now.
So what about things like they have their own courts, and sometimes they have their own areas of the country where, other people aren't allowed, and just the exclusivity of it. I mean, it seems like there would be lots of times when Sharia law would bump up against our law. Well,
let them look, if they have their own courts and they can participate in those freely without endangering or obstructing the lives of people to do that. We do that all the time in all the religions that we have out there. It would be wrong, for instance, for the city of Wiley, Texas, to tell First Baptist of Wiley that they cannot kick out someone from their membership that is violating the principles of their religion after they followed through their own process, their court process, if you will, of Matthew 18, of going and saying you've got a problem in sin, you're not repenting, we're bringing you before the body, no, you're not repenting, you're getting out of here, and treating them as an outsider entirely. That is our own system of courts, if you will. Orthodox Jewish followers have their own court system as well to follow Levitical law in the process throughout that as well. So long as that does not violate the civil rights, meaning the secular rights that every American might have to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's perfectly acceptable, and sort of you can consider it sort of like a matter of contract between people, if you will. It's not exactly accurate, but that's kind of how you might consider it. I've chosen to be a part of this group, just like I might choose to be part of a country club, and if I violate the terms terms of the country club, they can kick me out. So you've already admitted yourself to be a part of that jurisdiction, if you will, and so they've got some control over your rights in terms of what you believe. Now, again, if First Baptist of Wiley were to not just simply kick the person out for being a bad Christian or not, failing to repent on things, but they kicked them out and then took stones and stoned them, well, then I would have a problem with the First Baptist Church of Wiley. By the way, First Baptist Church of Wiley is a real place. They don't do that, to the best of my knowledge. So don't send us any nasty letters because of all that. I think they're very nice people over there that don't probably do any of that stuff. But the point is, if you are violating the civil rights of someone else to be, alive, the civil authorities have a just sword in their hand to punish you for that thing.
Let's take another phone call. Pete, I think you want to join in on the conversation as well. What would you like to add?
Well, I was just wondering, in Europe that has the similar laws that we have here, thou shalt not murder, we saw where an influx of Muslims, went into communities and overtook the civic authorities and introduced their own Sharia law. And we see, these thousands of people coming in here to the United States of America. Some of these towns, are 2,000, 3,000. You have an influx of quite a bit of those Muslims, and they can easily take over the civic and try to bring up their own. What about that?
I think, first of all, you have some legal recourse for all of that. First of all, in my little booklet, I talk about 1, 8, and 14. Sharia law violates the First Amendment. That's one, because, of course, it establishes religion. It violates the Eighth Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. And most importantly, and I'll leave this to Jeremy to talk about, it violates number 14, the 14th Amendment, equal protection. So if they tried to go into a town and set that up, we have a good legal recourse to deal with that.
Yeah, and my friend, I take issue with the premise of the question to at least put on the same level European socialism and American freedom. I think those are widely divergent systems of government and completely different ends between the two of them. In the way that we govern ourselves is dramatically different than what you would see in Eastern European socialistic countries. And so I think we have to start with saying you're comparing not just apples and oranges, probably apples and rocks. I mean, there are two different things completely here. But let's take the question a step further and say, let's say there's 1,000 people that come in that change the voting demographics of a particular or geographic region. That could happen. That's true. That actually could happen, where you could have a certain jurisdiction of this country, a city that is established that decides to invoke, 12 leaders of a 13-member city council that has these opinions. They could do that. That is, I guess, technically possible. Whether that would sustain itself against the rest of the state or the county, that's a little bit different. But I think, because I'm running short on time, so that's why I'm kind of shortening my comments here, but I think that what I'm trying to drive at is to say it is all the more reason for you and I to be faithfully involved within our local politics in order to make sure that kind of leadership does not arise to the leadership of our locality, our state, or our nation. And if it does, to find new candidates that will replace them, because they are not given autocratic rule. They still have rule by we the people.
Well said. We will take a break. Be back with more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Earlier in the week, of course, we talked about the heartbeat bill, which is now the heartbeat law. 600 different laws in the state of Texas actually became laws on September 1st. And this one, as well as the one on election reform, have been the ones that have generated the greatest amount of controversy. But I thought we might go around the round table and get some comments from Penna and Jeremy, because first of all, this is becoming very significant. It may become a campaign issue, and I think it's also been used by President Joe Biden to try to get people distracted from what's been happening in Afghanistan by focusing on the issue of abortion. Nancy Pelosi wants to get a vote to even codify Roe versus Wade, so we've got a lot to talk about.
Yes, it's actually, as I said at the beginning of the program, it's national news, the heartbeat bill, and it bans abortions after you can hear the heartbeat, which is usually about 6 weeks. So that's really early, and a lot of the opponents will say, well, but they might not even know that they're pregnant by that time. And, it's something to celebrate, certainly. We haven't had anything like this that's actually gone into law, because they're always challenged. And that, I think the first thing that we should talk about with this one is the enforcement of it is different than all the others. It was pointedly included in the law that the government would not be enforcing this. And so how is I don't even want to start to explain it, Jeremy.
I'm not sure I can either, so don't look too much at me.
Okay, well, maybe we ought to send people to pointofview.net and let them read what David French had to say. But, he answers a lot of questions that are beyond the questions I would have even had. My basic question is, why is this law, why did the Supreme Court, because it actually did go to the Supreme Court right before it became law. It was an emergency decision, and they allowed it to become law. And so that was that was a reason for celebration across the pro-life movement.
That one I can answer. That one's a procedural issue that I think I can answer. Yeah, look, and that one is just, it's very common for this to happen on the left or the right when an issue of controversy comes up and someone thinks that law should not be law. The legislature's job, remember, is to pass a law. It's the courts to say whether or not that law is constitutional. And so this is just our system of government. We do this all the time. The legislature passes the law, the executive enforces or signs that law, and then the judiciary says whether or not that law agrees with the Constitution. So this happens all the time. You can pass a law on anything, and anybody can challenge it in court if they want to. And sometimes you can even try to challenge it on its face before it even goes into any kind of enforcement. And that's exactly where we found this law to be the case right here. And so the district court, I can't remember how that all shook out at the lower levels of things, but suffice to say, the other side was not happy with where this ended. I think the district court actually said, no, it's perfectly fine, go on. And they skipped right over the Fifth Circuit, went up to the Supreme Court and said, wait a minute, this is of such crazy emergency. We need you to weigh in right now to say that this is wrong and that this injunction issued by the district court should not stand. And it could not go into law when it comes into effect on September the 1st. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, that's not the right time for us to do that right now. We're not going to do that. We think the district court has the ability to make that decision. They haven't done anything procedurally incorrect. And so for us to take the additional step right now to invalidate this law would actually be for us to weigh in on the merits, and we're not prepared to do that right now. The law has been duly passed. It's been challenged in court. There's not had a time for it to be enforced against anyone. So this facial challenge is kind of a theory right now. It's not an as-applied challenge, meaning it's not been applied against me, and so I can show you how it actually affects me. And so we're allowing this to go into effect. And you can continue to challenge it, and you can continue to brief the issue and do discovery and all the things that are going around litigation as that always happens. And once it's fully briefed by the district court and then goes up to the Fifth Circuit, then the en banc Fifth Circuit, and then comes back to the Supreme Court, then maybe we'll have a chance to look at the merits of the whole issue, but we're not going to weigh in on those merits right now and shortchange the entire process. And this is what has set the left on their edge, right? That this is saying, hey, this is the shadow docket that is driving our policy. Therefore, we've got to add more judges and justices so that this shadow docket doesn't get in the way of our democracy and destroy our democracy, as if that's even possible. The reality is this shadow docket has been around for centuries in our country. That's how the court operates. This is a procedural element to having a judiciary. The merits of that argument are going to come later on. On this law, probably by the time it goes through all the different layers of the federal court system, we will have already heard arguments on the Dobbs case, which is coming up this term in, I think, November when it's scheduled for argument, which will address the issue of Roe v. Wade head on. And then it'll change the entire field for the abortion discussion all across the country, let alone this one little tiny law in Texas.
And the Dobbs case bans abortion after 15 weeks.
I think that's right. And I don't, because I've got so many other
it's
things
the Mississippi
working on.
Law.
That's right. And it'll challenge that issue, whether you can actually go on the kind of the trimester system that Roe put together, if you can have states to regulate abortion in any way, which I think actually Roe allows you to do, frankly. It wasn't until the other cases with Casey and others that kind of messed that whole system up. But this allows for that debate to take place in those 50 different laboratories of democracy around the country. That's perfectly fine. So for the left to be yelling Chicken Little again, I think gives us a reminder as to how apoplectic they get when the tools that they use to advance their own agenda is used back against them.
And so this was planned and kind of baked into this law, because normally government officials would enforce the law and the opponents could sue them.
Yeah, that's the part I haven't read up well enough on issue an opinion. But it was baked into the law to say, well, not even baked into the system that we can go through on every controversial litigation or legislation right now to say that it's going to be challenged in court. And that's what's happened. And that's just all the Supreme Court has basically said. Hey, look, this has been challenged in court. We don't see any need to uphold or to reverse the district court to put in a stay on this issue or enjoin this law from going into effect. The legislature is allowed to make changes when it comes to restricting access to abortion in this case. Even under Roe, they're allowed to do that. So this is perfectly acceptable for them to do. If they've chosen to do so, now you have a problem with that, go argue about it in court. When this is more fully brief, we'll give you an opinion on it. But to issue that opinion now would be actually to impose the Supreme Court's judgment for the judgment of the lower courts, and that is incorrect.
And again, back to your point you were making just a minute ago, Penna, because you don't have anybody enforcing it at the moment, you don't have anybody to sue. And of course, nobody has standing because nobody's been affected by it. But it does allow for individuals to sue. So that provides an opportunity. And so even though we have, I think it's 12 states that have actually passed some kind of heartbeat law, but this one actually is in effect at the moment. Right. All these other bills eventually were declared unconstitutional. There was an injunction issued against them. And this is the first time since 1973, if you think about this, that you actually have a state law banning abortion. I don't know how long it'll stand, but it's something we've never seen before.
Well, and I think, and we can get to this after the break too, but it really reveals the sharp divide on the court right now. And I'm an officer of the court, so I don't want to say too much on things, but I think some of the writings that have come through this, in the dissents in particular, Justice Sotomayor's last line was something to the effect of having the sanctity of our precedents honored.
Yeah.
Maybe you choose a different word or phrase turn of the phrase when you're addressing the sanctity of human life. Don't compare it to law that has been written by a court.
And we'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the surveys and a number of other things. But since we get phone calls coming in, let's take some. 1-800-351-1212. Your thoughts about abortion and the heartbeat law. We'll take those calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
20 years ago, a Democratic senator writing in the Washington Post criticized President George W. Bush for saying that the U.S. would do whatever it took to defend Taiwan. That senator is now our president. Joe Biden might have changed his mind since 2001. He certainly has changed his mind on other topics. China is different in 2021 than it was in 2001. Back then, the focus was on trying to bring China into the community of nations. Today, the focus is on China's threat to the international order. Earlier this year, Admiral Philip Davidson warned Congress that China could assault Taiwan in the next 6 years. Other commentators believe that such an aggressive action might happen shortly after the Winter Olympics in China, which are held next February. If China decided to move against Taiwan, would President Biden and his cabinet believe a military response was necessary? Is Taiwan important enough to defend? Taiwan is often called the heart of Asia because of its central location, but there is much more to this small island than just its strategic location. It is roughly the size of Maryland and the home for 24 million people. They are wealthier than most of their neighbors. If you look at per capita GDP, the U.S. is the 7th wealthiest country. Taiwan is the 12th wealthiest country. America is supposed to honor the Taiwan Relations Act. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan should trigger response. But how likely is President Biden to respond given his long relationship with China and his recent disaster withdrawing troops and civilians from Afghanistan? U.S. support of Taiwan may for now provide enough deterrence to keep China from attacking the island, but the future is still uncertain. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go out to Georgia first. Randy, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Question. First, I'd like to say, Kerby, when are you and Penna going to bring charges against Planned Parenthood officials in your area? Secondly, I want to say 3 cheers and hats off to Texas for passing the law, and I hope other states follow suit. Now I have a related question. What is Point of View's position on the vaccines which are made with aborted baby cell? Abby Johnson, the former Planned Parenthood director, is opposed to it, but what is your position in your organization on that?
Sure. Well, and I think we've talked about that before, but let me just real quickly give that answer. We've talked about the study that Randy Alcorn, who I have probably the highest respect for, pointing out that a few of those do raise very significant questions. AstraZeneca, for example, using aborted parts for the production of it. And so obviously we'd have some concerns about that from a pro-life point of view.
Yeah, and that's not even being given in the United States.
Right.
But, on a lot of those issues, do we take a position where a radio show that talks about different positions on different things? And obviously we have a very conservative point of view and a pro-life point of view. So I think we would be disgusted by using a vaccine that used aborted baby parts.
And it just so happens we have a resource for you at firstliberty.org that would not only talk through the issues of how to get the exemption or accommodation that you might want to request, but it also talks at least a little bit, and it gives you links to go find out more information about whether or not various of these vaccines contain fetal lines or have been tested on fetal lines.
Right.
And there's a lot more resources available to you out there from, I just blanked on the name of the organization, but the Charlotte Lozier Institute has done a really good job of articulating all these things. But if you want the summary fashion, go to firstliberty.org, download the toolkit there. It's inside that.
And Pharmacists for Life also has done some material on that as well. But that's a good question. This whole idea of whether or not you have anybody that you can sue, because you've looked at some of this during the break here, Jeremy, and it just says, well, we don't have anybody that's bringing the case, and so we can't sue anybody, so the law is in effect. And what is happening is right now Planned Parenthood and some of these abortion clinics are sort of backing off a little bit, which is interesting because sooner or later somebody's going to say, well, I'm going to sue an individual that did get an abortion after 6 weeks, and then collect my $10,000 and all those kinds of things, which are part of that particular law that actually only went into effect September 1st.
Yeah, and let's be clear.
But the suit wouldn't be against the person that got the abortion.
No, that's
it would
correct.
be the person that performed the abortion or someone who aided.
That's right. So again, we're not talking about the vaccine anymore. We're talking about that Texas law that was challenged. And so I wanted to be very punctilious about this. I went back and wanted to be very clear about what we were being asked to review here. And so I found the decision from the Supreme Court and reviewed it again. And look, you can go, I think you said you have it at pointofview.net. You can find it at scotusblog.com as well if you need to find it. Or if you really want to be cool, go to the supremecourt.gov, and you might be able to find it there as well, although that'll be more difficult for you. But it's like a page and a half for you to read. So if you don't want to read the dissents and the concurrences, don't worry about that. The whole thing's 12 pages. But the part that you want to talk about here is just very short. And it basically says, look, you sued state officials. The state officials have no authority and no intention of using any authority that they might have to enforce this law against you. And so you can't sue them. And so if you can't sue them, we can't speak into this issue. So sorry, we can't. Now, you did sue one private respondent and one person that might have a private right of action to sue you. But they submitted an affidavit that said they don't have any intent at the present time, I like that language, at the present time of enforcing this against you. And so that person doesn't get you standing in here as well. So I'm sorry, there's nothing for us to be able to do here because you've not brought any people here. What does it say? It says, it's unclear whether the named defendants in this lawsuit can or will seek to enforce the Texas law. And if it's unclear, by the way, that means that's why we have a judicial process. Go back down to the briefing of the whole thing. That's why we have a secondary process called an appeal where we get even more detailed about these arguments, and they can have a full record in front of them. It says the state has represented that neither it nor its executive employee possesses the authority to enforce the Texas law either directly or indirectly, and it keeps on going on. The sole private citizen respondent before us has filed an affidavit saying he's not going to do that. In light of all these things, this orders, then they go out to be very clear. This is not intended to reach a conclusion on the constitutionality of Texas's law, and in no way limits other procedurally proper challenges to the Texas law, including in the Texas state courts. And so this is just kicking the issue back to the state, kicking the issue back into the litigation that's presently rolling, and let it take its place. The sky has not fallen here. It is a normal process of litigation for that to continue to go on. Meanwhile, we should point this out. The law is in effect. Those who provide abortion services in the state of Texas are concerned that they would be subject to this law and may, in fact, be sued for performing abortions. And guess what? It's having the intended effect. They're withdrawing from that process and providing that service. And what that means, let's just put that in real stark terms, lives are being saved because of this law. So even if it becomes overturned someday into the future, hundreds of lives are being saved daily right now because women are choosing to go instead to pregnancy care centers who are saying, hey, let us come beside you and help you out with this whole thing. They've been there the whole time, by the way. Right. But now they're feeding and clothing and helping and caring for their babies that are going to be born and have a chance at life again.
Randy,
that's a lot of abortions and babies that are being saved.
Right.
Because it's about, the estimates are it's about 80% of abortions in Texas take place after 6 weeks, after the heartbeat. So this is a big state. So they picked the right state.
And Randy asked a question, well, who's going to bring the lawsuit? Is it going to be Penna, Dexter, Kerby Anderson? I suspect it's going to be probably somebody with a Texas right to lie, because think about what you have to do. First of all, you have to have had an abortion after September 1st, and it's only September 3rd, if I'm correct on this, so we still have a few more days before that. Then it has to have been after 6 weeks, and it has to have been verified, and so there are just a couple other steps which would even have to be taken for someone to actually bring the suit, and I suspect it will probably be, it could be Chelsea at Human Life Coalition, who we've heard from here as well. But it's probably going to be an organization that has the legal wherewithal to pursue that and then to stand the various challenges that will then go through the courts, right?
Yeah, I love how the left is trying to dunk on this whole issue, right? And they've come up with all these different things. Carlos Chapman has there's a meme going around the internet. She's a law professor at Washington Lee University, and she's quoted as saying in response to this issue, if a fetus is a person at 6 weeks pregnant, is that when child support starts? Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
That's what David French said the other day.
Is that also when you can't deport the mother because she's carrying a U.S. citizen? Yes, I'm in favor of that. Can I insure 6-week fetus and collect if I miscarry? If there's an insurance product to be sold for that, I think I would probably invest in it when my wife was pregnant at the time. And she ends by just figuring if we're going all in there, we should go all in. I am right with you. Let's go all in on all those things. We're ready to go.
Okay, speaking of going all in, President Biden he said this is so extreme. He has vowed a whole of government response to this Texas pro-life law. And, it always amazes me when the federal government, doesn't allow the states to do things that they normally have the responsibility to do.
Jen Psaki was really upset about, women who are pregnant, pregnant women, pregnant women, this. Wait, did she not get the memo? These are birthing parents, birthing people, not. Yeah, it's just the level of discrimination.
I was waiting for this one.
Intolerance is just wretched in the White House right now. How dare they question or assume the gender of these birthing people?
Isn't that fun? Let's take one other issue before we take a break here, and that is the argument being made right now about being all in, that this is going to ban all abortions. And I found this one the other day. There was a study that was done and found that 2/3 of Americans thought that even if Roe versus Wade was overturned, and of course that's coming when that oral argument is being heard, you thought it was in November. But even if indeed that is overturned, it doesn't ban all abortions. It just puts us back to the day before Roe versus Wade was implemented. And you're probably going to have some states that are going to be more abortion permissive and others that are more abortion resistant, don't you think?
You do. And some states are already passing laws that give us quite a hint on how that state's going to stand on that issue after Roe is struck down, which I don't know. To me, it's looking a little more likely, a little more hopeful as time goes on.
One other one, since I'm giving you statistics, 35% of Americans believe abortion should be illegal in all cases, but then an additional 30% believe it should be illegal in most cases. So what is being proposed right now is not quite as radical as Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden would suggest it is.
And by the way, I'm all for Nancy wanting to bring that to the floor of Congress and try to codify it. Absolutely do it. Let's make sure that debate continues all the way through 2022. Let's have that debate, because I think that's a great thing for us to be debating right now.
I would think so. We want to get your comments and opinions. 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a break. We'll cover that with you right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Fun left half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. And around the round table, of course, we have Penna and Jeremy, and we will get into a couple of other topics. But let me just, for those of you where this came kind of fast and furious, and you said, what are we talking about here? We've got a piece here where, again, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, said that yesterday that the House will vote to enshrine into law reproductive health care for all women across America. That means kill more babies, but nevertheless, the ban is an attempt to codify Roe versus Wade. It's called the Women's Health Protection
Birthing
Act.
People.
Yes.
Birthing people.
No, they didn't put birthing people in that title.
No, and so here we go, Birthing People Health Protection Act, which is interesting because that would probably pass in the House, although you never are sure. It's going to be a lot tougher in the Senate for a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't even have all the Democrats sign in terms of co-sponsors. Robert Casey from Pennsylvania has not signed it, and Joe Manchin, you know him from West Virginia, has not signed it. So, and of course, you got to believe that there probably would be a filibuster by the Republicans. And then, of course, that's where Senator Ed Markey in Massachusetts called for the elimination of the Senate filibuster to allow for this vote on Roe versus Wade. So we'll see where it goes.
Look, I joke about the birthing people thing because it's hilarious, and we ought to point that out to them every single time we get the chance to do so. You don't care about women until you care about women, apparently. But I do actually wonder, kind of procedurally, because the House passed that rule that all their language had to be changed for, you remember that like birthing people language kind of stuff, not parental unit 1 or parental unit 2 instead of mom and dad.
It was in some HHS regulations.
Yeah,
that they have to use that
and
terminology.
also from the floor of the House.
From the floor of the House and all that. How do they have the debate on that bill? And like, how do you do that? Because they can't say women on that. And then what do you do about drafting the bill? Because you got to use, I would assume, because that was the directive, is that your codifications have to include definitions of, you can't use this outmoded and antiquated language of, gender categories like male and female. How do you do it? So, I mean, Nancy, I am 100% for you. I shouldn't be so informal. Speaker Pelosi, I am 100% in favor of you bringing this to the floor. Do so roughly January 1st. Let's see how long that debate continues. I'm happy for your people that are going back into their districts next year to have to go back and talk to their people about, which one do they say? Do they say the Birthing People's Protection Act, or do they say the Women's Health Act? Their heads are going to explode on this because they don't know who to cater to. Do you cater to the woke mob that demands I say birthing people, or do I cater to the feminists who want me to say women? Like, which one? I think this will be just absolutely, just pass me the bucket of popcorn, because I think it'll be a ton of fun to watch.
It'll be great entertainment.
Well, let's take some more phone calls, because we do want to also get to another article by Byron York about the very significant reality of what that might mean in the elections. But let's take another phone call first. We'll go to Texas. Fred, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, Fred from Texas. And what I'm talking about here today is the election integrity bill is now on the governor's desk for a signature. However, the news cycle has moved off to the abortion bill, the heartbeat bill, which is great because they're not paying attention to the election integrity bill right now. They're talking about women's rights and all this crazy stuff. Now, Trump used to do that. He used to change the news cycle all the time and had the media chasing their tail. And boy, do we miss President Trump. In fact, I was at a meeting with Alan West, and he was talking about, Orange Man bad. You always used to hear that mean tweets. And he asked the question, but do you want him? And before he could finish the sentence, back now, the whole room erupted in, yes, we want him back. So, yeah.
But the point you're well taken is that I've been watching some of the memes out there, and they've usually said we have two examples of authoritarian government out of the state of Texas. And one, of course, is the abortion issue. The other is the election reform bill. And I pointed out the other day, and there's been some very good material, both in the National Review and the Wall Street Journal, saying even though right now it seems like every time there is some piece of legislation out there that Joe Biden doesn't like, like. He goes to the most hyperbolic extremes when you call this, again, Jim Crow 2.0, when all it does is say, I don't think 24-hour day voting is such a good idea. What could possibly go wrong 3 a.m. in the morning? And drive-through voting isn't a good idea. But otherwise, you can vote early voting from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day. And if you want to do an absentee ballot, you don't even have to do a signature now. You just have to either put down your license plate or your license number, driver's license, or the last 4 digits of your Social Security. That seems like pretty common sense kind of stuff.
Yeah, everybody wants voter ID. I mean, if you poll all kinds of demographics, it's popular, and that's all really it does. I mean, things like training for election judges. I mean, that's really, really controversial, and for poll watchers. And going back to what we had before COVID, when we didn't have 24-hour voting. What's the problem? When you use the word authoritarian, I'm thinking H.R. 1, the bill that would not allow states to control their elections, is an authoritarian bill. If you're worried about having an authoritarian bill, worry about that.
Or the one that we're encouraging people to write on this week is H.R. 4. Now, that's a little different. That's seen as a compromise bill, but what it basically does is say, well, we'll let the Justice Department, we'll let these leftist lawyers in the Justice Department pre-clear any kind of particular laws in the states. Jeremy, I want to come to you. First of all, if I think I'm right, Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution says that the states should be responsible, not the federal government. And what could possibly go wrong if we let various lawyers in the Justice Department determine what kind of laws you can have?
Well, in the great words of Jacob Marley, much. There's a lot that could go wrong, but I'm a little slow to this game, right? Because I thought didn't we have Democratic officials in Austin who said this was never going to pass? that law. I mean, this was going to be the seminal issue of their time, the civil rights issue of their time, and over their dead bodies. And maybe I'm being hyperbolic at this point, but there was they fled the state in this grand show of spreading COVID to other people in Washington D.C. Going and protesting this bill by going out of a state to a territory that does not extradite them back into our state. I mean, I thought this was not going to pass. Are you saying that it passed?
Yes.
That even after their time of protest, it failed.
Yes.
And how much money did the Democrats in this situation waste the state of Texas? I mean, that's got to be a lot of money that we had to pay for them to sit in a hotel for days on end and convalesce from COVID and wash their undergarments and post it on Twitter for drying in the shower and that kind of thing. I mean, what I thought that was not going to pass. You mean it passed? Oh my goodness, this is remarkable that it passed. But now that I'm caught up, get back to your question.
Oh yes.
Yes, there's much that could go wrong here because the 50 laboratories of democracy that are these United States are the ones that are tasked with determining how their people are going to vote. And what rules are going to be implied. And when we remove that principle of federalism, meaning that there are two different variations of power in this country, the state power and the federal government power, and when we say that the federal government must own all of that power, that nationalizes the entire process. And what might work in Texas may not actually work in Vermont. And what might work in Maine may be completely antithetical to the process in Iowa. And that's why you see every election season we have these different primaries and caucuses, and you go, why does Iowa do it like that? That's so weird. It's because they can. Mm-hmm. They have the freedom to be able to do it as they wish to be able to do that. And so there are some parameters, of course, that I think we all agree upon. And the Constitution sets some of those parameters as well. You can't be a felon and vote. You lose the right to do that when you commit a felony. You have to be a certain age because we don't want 4-year-olds to be taking their crayon in the voting booth to draw pictures on they don't have the capacity, right? There are certain things that you have to be, a citizen to be able to vote for your elected government. That's still a pretty important thing. So, and again, this principle of federalism protects against this overreach by government when you have AOC, for instance, that would want to say, you know what, I think 12-year-olds should have the right to vote. And then someone in the, quote, hinterlands of this country is saying, no, wait a minute, I don't really want to have my 12-year-old who thinks that, Grand Theft Auto is the greatest thing since sliced bread be the guy that's voting on our elected leaders right now. No, that's not what you're allowed to have differences here. And we do not want to nationalize this process that takes it away from the local. You govern best when you govern least. And so the smallest subsidiary part of that ownership should be the one that's in charge of that. That's really at the state level for an issue like this.
Constitution says certain enumerated powers are delegated to the federal government. I'd say, federal government, why don't you do things like protect the border and not worry about some of these other issues? We'll be back right after this.
Who could miss the disturbing shift in how our society deals with gender confusion in young people? The consensus once was that it's best to give children time for gender dysphoria to pass, and, if it persists, to help them with their pain. Now, medical professionals routinely agree with and affirm trans-identifying adolescents, allowing them to self-diagnose and providing them with gender-bending drugs and surgeries. There are voices of caution and reason. The American College of Pediatricians boldly opposes this agenda and speaks the truth. So does Abigail Schreier, who writes columns for the Wall Street Journal and the Federalist. Most of her recent work sets forth her rising concern about the transgender craze among teenage girls. She spoke recently at a Hillsdale College event. An adaptation of her remarks appears in Hillsdale's Imprimis, June-July 2021. She describes gender dysphoria as the feeling of severe discomfort in a person's biological sex. This has historically begun in early childhood, between the ages of 2 and 4, and has usually involved a boy who insisted he was not a boy but a girl. Ms. Schreier points out that in many cases, puberty seems to have helped children overcome gender dysphoria. Now, large numbers of teen girls are declaring themselves trans. Ms. Schreier says in prior cases, when no one intervened medically or encouraged what we today call social transition, over 70% of them naturally outgrew their gender dysphoria. But we no longer leave these kids alone. They get affirmation in a new trans identity. They can have new names, new pronouns. They get hormones, even surgery. In her book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, Abigail Schreier describes what she says has become a social contagion among troubled teen girls. Gender activists encourage this by lying to them, telling them only they know their true gender. It's a family-destroying, culture-killing message. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and I thought we'd go around the round table to mention one other very important article. This one's by Byron York, in which he talks about the mortal threat to Democrats' progressive dreams, and that is the future didn't quite turn out the way that some of the Democratic leaders thought that they might turn out. So, Penna, what do we find out from this particular article that we've posted here today?
Well, for the last, many years, we've been hearing that the demographics are in favor of progressives winning more and more elections and Democrats winning more and more elections. And it hasn't totally worked that way. As the census shows, first of all, yes, white people are coming fewer and fewer, but the Democrat Party is now the party of the sort of progressive white person. I mean, that's actually in the last election, you saw more white college-educated people going toward the Democrats than you had before. And guess what? They Hispanic section of the population is going more and more Republican, somewhat conservative, somewhat family values supporting. So this has been, first of all, 2016 was kind of a shock, and then 2020 was even more of a shock to the people that were just counting on demographics to give Democrats power in perpetuity. So that's kind of what he tried to treat, or he did do very well in treating in this article by Byron York.
One of the things, Jeremy, I might ask you about is that there is a sense in which everybody lives in the bubble, but especially leftists tend to live even more in a bubble. And so when they hear this issue of abortion, they say, oh, good, we're going to win on this abortion issue, unaware, I think, sometimes of how many people would be either pro-life or at least close to being pro-life. And they also tend to say, everybody I know votes with me, so there's certainly no problem in the future. And then they start looking at some of the numbers and saying, well, maybe it isn't necessarily it's going to be as easy to win these elections as we thought they would.
Well, I hope they would say that. I don't know if they would say that last part for sure, right? To say that, well, maybe I should change my mind is really what you're trying to say there. And that's not going to be the case. They are so ideologically committed to this. Why is that? Well, because I think for many, sadly, this is a religious sacrament to them, right? And that's why you have, at the end of Justice Sotomayor's dissenting opinion in this Texas case at the Supreme Court, you have her end it with a completely ironic turn of the phrase that says that we should honor the sanctity of our court precedents. I mean, does she not know what she's actually talking? She's talking about a sanctity of human life issue. Sanctity, Al Mohler talked about this on his podcast this morning, which is why it's stuck in my brain all day. He said, sanctity means sacred, something coming from the sacred. And there is nothing sacred about a court's opinion, a judicial opinion. That is not sacred material whatsoever. In fact, there would be some on the left who would argue that if it is in fact sacred, then it is a violation of the Establishment Clause. But never mind that for a moment. It is not sacred, but human life is terribly sacred. And it reflects the image of God, as we believe, and so therefore it has a level of sanctity with it. And so for the justice to then admit that, to use that phrase is a horrible, just irony, I guess, is the best way to put that. But that's why I think the left won't learn from this lesson here. That they're going to think, well, if we just advocate harder, then they will change their mind. Look, it is coming from me. Yes, I have a religious perspective on the issue of the sanctity of human life, and I'm going to advocate for that because I think it's the right position to have at all times. I hope they would be as honest to say that their position is likewise religiously driven, or at least philosophically driven, that they cannot change their mind on this whole thing. Look, I think the law is about to change on this in some way. I don't know that it'll be a complete reversal or not. I'm concerned about that. But, to put it back to the day before 1973, when the states could regulate this issue as they deemed worthy, I think would be a great day in our nation. And it allowed them to come and make the case. If you can get enough people in Austin, for instance, to come down to there and say, we believe that we should regulate abortion to some level and allow that to be the case, then, you kind of got to go. That's been the problem here, is that the Supreme Court has removed that debate and pressed upon it kind of this presumption of constitutionality that doesn't exist. It's not there. It's not, you can't even find it in whatever penumbras that the court talks about, whatever those happen to be, as a matter of fact, and they've created this sort of this veneer of constitutionality as if that somehow, if you search the pages of the Constitution, you'll find the word abortion in there. You won't. It doesn't exist in there. And so I welcome the political debate because I do think that people will be genuinely surprised. And as they're surprised, I think they're also going to be depressed by it, frankly. I think they're going to be shocked to see how much they are surrounded by people who disagree with them on a very consequential matter.
I think, the poll that you cited about how many people are against abortion at any time, 35%, didn't you say? And then the numbers that want to regulate it to
30%,
quite a bit.
Yeah, that's two-thirds.
That's a surprising vote to the left. That's a surprising, I think, opinion poll, because I don't think they think that way. They think they've willed it for however many years we've had Roe. that it would be constitutional. They speak that way. They think that way, and they operate that it's part of the Constitution, that abortion rights are part of the Constitution. There never have been, and it's been such an issue that the majority of the country has never been able to accept that or be comfortable with it.
And it's been reinforced, that position has been reinforced in every institution that they own. Right, so that the political world, it's been presumed there and reinforced that abortion is safe, legal, and rare, whatever that actually would mean. It's been reinforced in every Hollywood production that's come out of there. You never or very rarely see. You will only find an outlier pro-life movie, or if there's a character on TV that might be pro-life, it's huge news, right? And so you've got to actually kind of kiss the ring, even in Hollywood, to say that you agree with this thing. If you want to get a part, because every producer and director in Hollywood believes that you ought to think this way. Every cocktail party, every academic institution has, at least of state-level academic institutions, all the Ivy Leagues, all the people who are really smart has said, no, the really enlightened people believe that there's a right to choice and reproductive freedom and all this kind of stuff. So all these institutions have reinforced that position for decades now. And so it will be very hard for people to unlearn those things. That's why I think it's going to be very important for people to be paying attention to shows like this, to be participating with people like Kerby and Penna, to learn how to articulate these issues to your neighbors who, can we borrow this phrase, who are now waking up to the realization they're getting woke in a different direction on the importance of human life and trying to realize what this actually means. We're not without precedent on this. This happened years ago after abolition. When the slave trade finally came to a conclusion, there was a long period. That's why it took so long for it to be fully outlawed in the country of England. It took people a long time to unlearn the presumption that was good, or that was okay, at least, that you could be not bothered by something that does not come in front of you every single day. So people will have to unlearn that presumption even now. There will be people in your pew this Sunday that will have to unlearn that, because they've operated for so long in that milieu, that kind of universe around them. They've been a fish their entire life. They expect the water to be around them. And so they've got to figure out how to swim in different kind of water when that comes. That was a terrible analogy. Why did I come up with that analogy?
Oh, I think it's a good one. And it just illustrates, again, what we are trying to do here at Point of View. And also not only support Point of View, but First Liberty. We've got the links there as well. And since we're coming to Labor Day, let me just mention that Labor Day is Monday. That will be a tape. But then we will be spending some time talking with some of our friends with Counsel for Life about this issue of abortion. We'll be talking about the Middle East with Mitch Glazer. We actually have the Kendrick brothers in next week, and they have the new movie coming out, Show Me the Father. So we have that going on as well. Chuck Bentley will be with us talking about economic issues. We have a very busy week next week, but I encourage you to enjoy your Labor Day weekend and Labor Day, and we'll see you live here on Tuesday. First of all, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We look forward to seeing you back here live on Tuesday, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.